Good morning, everyone. So today we are on the distribution policy. Remember, this is about the place. How are you going to get your product or your service to the consumer? So it's distributing to the consumer. So despite all the competitive advantages of a product will not necessarily capture the major share of a market. There are many other factors that need to be considered, such as the distribution, the place, the time, and the price. Consumers do not always have the time to go looking for a particular brand of product. If it is not available where they are shopping, they will probably buy an alternative brand. Marketing management must investigate all the current distribution channels and must always look for a new and better way to get their product to the consumer. So let's just talk about what a distribution channel is. It's firms or individuals that help to transport and store the goods from the time of production until they are consumed by the consumer. So we have what we call these channels of distribution, and it always starts with the producer and it ends with the consumer, as you can see in this slide. It is the path that the product must follow to get from its origin to the final consumer. For example, when you buy fruit juice at a shop, you are the customer at the end of the producer's marketing channel of distribution. All the role players in the distribution channel are then called the intermediaries. So that's this middle group here. All of these people are the intermediaries. There are 4 distribution channels for consuming goods in South Africa. And the first one is directly from the producer to the consumer. It is the shortest pathway possible since the producer sells a product directly to consumer. The consumer buys orange juice from the street vendor who prepares it at a store. Then we move on to the producer, retailer, and consumer. That is this one here. The producer sells its products to the consumer using a retailer. So electrical and household manufacturers use retailers. This is a single distribution channel. Then we move on to where we go from the manufacturer to the wholesaler, to the retailer, and then the consumer. That is this one over here. This is known as the traditional channel of distribution. That's why there's a little star there. For example, the consumer buys from the shop. The shop buys from a wholesaler, which in turn gets its stock in bulk from the manufacturer. Consumer products such as jungle oats are sold by the producer to a wholesaler who again sells it to the retailer who sells it to the consumer. And lastly, we're looking at the distribution channel on the very right, where it moves from the producer to the agent, to the wholesaler, then the retailer, and finally to the consumer. Right, now in this case, agents often connect manufacturers to the wholesaler or retailer. The more intermediaries there are in the distribution channel, the larger the number of consumers that can be reached, especially consumers in rural areas who will also have access to these goods. We're going to look at intermediaries and we're going to focus on 3 of them. Remember, an intermediary are those people or businesses that help to move the product from the producer to the consumer. So if we look at agents or brokers, they do not become owners of the product, but they are commissioned by the manufacturers to go and sell their products on their behalf for a commission. Whereas a wholesaler primarily sells goods to retailers or hawkers or spaza shops. Examples include trade centers or macro. Wholesalers buy in bulk from the manufacturers. They carry storage and transport costs because they take possession of the goods as soon as the manufacturer delivers it to them. Remember, the agents never own the stock, but the wholesalers do. The retailers market directly to the final consumer. A retailer offers a diversified range of goods from a whole lot of different producers and manufacturers to satisfy consumer needs. So we can think of plenty of examples, be it Woolworths, Edgar's, C&A, Game. All of those are examples of retailers. So if we recap very quickly on our three intermediaries, wholesalers, they buy in bulk, they do not sell significant quantities to the final consumer, they carry storage and transport costs. Retailers sell in small quantities to consumer and they bring the goods closer to the consumer. The agents are normally involved in importing and exporting. They do not take ownership of goods as they merely pass the goods to the wholesalers and the retailers. Now the last section that we're going to look at is whether people are using direct or indirect distribution methods. The marketing manager will base decisions about whether to sell a direct or indirect channel of distribution on a number of factors, and these include: is the product bought by lots of people living in different towns and cities? If so, then an indirect method must be used. Does the product appeal to only a few customers or it's very expensive? Then we're going to use a direct method from the producer to the consumer. Does a producer have the capacity to transport and store its own products? If they don't, then an indirect method is better, using agents and wholesalers who can then pass on the products. Does a producer have the necessary marketing knowledge to sell its products? If not, the producer would need an intermediary to advertise and or store it. Hence, indirect channel of distribution is better. Consumers are spread out in densely populated urban areas and remote rural areas. So in order to reach everyone, an indirect distribution method is way more beneficial. And that is the end of our distribution policy.